Your first root is non, which means not. You probably recognize this from words like non-smoking or non-violent. So non-smoking would be not smoking, non-violent would be not violent. Your first word is nonchalant. It is an adjective. It means coolly unconcerned, indifferent, or unexcited, casual. So I think casual is a really good word to remember, nonchalant. If you're being nonchalant, you're being really calm and like nothing's really bothering you. Like you don't care a lot about whatever situation you're in. Your synonyms are composed and dispassionate, and your antonym is anxious. Your sample sentence reads, when playing the prank on their sister, the three kids tried their best to look nonchalant, even though they were obviously excited about the prank. So you often hear nonchalant used in the context of a situation when you might expect someone to care a lot about something, or you might expect someone to be really excited, and instead they're acting really calmly or nonchalantly. So here they're excited about the prank, but they're trying to look nonchalant. They're trying to look not excited. This goose over here is looking nonchalant. So perhaps there are people who are running around or loud noises. The goose is uninterested. Nonchalant, totally cool, totally calm. Your next word using non is non-entity. It is a person or thing of no importance or something that does not exist or exists only in the imagination. So this is kind of a weird word because there are very few things that you'd actually say are non-entities, right? Because most things that we talk about do, in fact, exist. And a non-entity is something that's not an entity or something that does not exist. So you often hear feel like a non-entity. Your sample sentence is like that. When his coach had forgotten to mention him at the end of season banquet, Frank felt like a complete non-entity. So he's not a non-entity, right? Frank literally still exists, but he feels like he doesn't. He feels like a non-entity because no one recognized him. So this person over here, he's by himself, he looks pretty sad, might feel like a non-entity, like no one notices him. Your next root is brev, which means short. The word brief might help you to remember brev because they're really similar, and brief obviously means short. Your first word is abbreviate, which means to shorten a word or phrase by omitting letters, shortening, substituting shorter forms, etc. So this is probably familiar, and it can also mean to reduce anything in length. So your easiest form of abbreviation is looking at words, right, that get abbreviated. So LOL is an abbreviation of laugh out loud. However, it can also be to reduce anything in length. So if you have a paragraph that's 3 pages long, your teacher might tell you you really need to abbreviate that paragraph, you really need to make it shorter. That doesn't mean use LOL, it means shorten it. Your synonyms are condense and truncate, and your antonym is expand. Your sample sentence is, when giving a speech at a wedding, it is a good idea to abbreviate your stories because nobody wants to listen to a long speech at a wedding. So again, using that second definition of making anything shorter. Your next word is brevity. It's a noun. It means shortness of time or duration or briefness. And I would remember that word briefness for your synonym for brevity. And that's also how you're going to remember the difference between abbreviate and brevity, right? So abbreviate is to make something shorter as a verb. Brevity is a noun. It means briefness or shortness. Your second definition of brevity is the quality of being expressed, that should say, no, the quality of, maybe this is what we want, expressing much in few words, terseness. Your synonyms are transience or succinctness. Your antonyms are permanence or verbosity. And your sample sentence says, the 6-line poem was remarkable because of how much it managed to say despite its brevity. You have the Twitter logo over here because you need to write with brevity whenever you are writing on Twitter because there is that word length or character length limit. So write with brevity on Twitter. So brevity is a little bit tricky to kind of figure out how to grammatically use it correctly in sentences, but I would use that word briefness up here to check, right? So write with brevity, write with briefness. Yeah, that makes sense. So we're using it correctly. Your next root is ab, which means away from. A good word to help you remember that is going to be absent. If you are absent, you are away from wherever you normally would be. Your first word is abnormality. It is a noun. It means an unusual condition or irregularity, or it can also be an unusual thing or event. Your synonym you should recognize from, I believe, Unit 1, anomaly. Something strange is an anomaly. You can also call it an abnormality. You'll notice that these words are also pretty similar. And this is the noun form of abnormal. So if something is abnormal, you would say that it has an abnormality. This weird thing that's happening to that tree over there is an abnormality, right? So you might say, that tree has a very strange abnormality. Does not look like a regular tree trunk. Your sample sentence is, the security guard was trained to notice any abnormality in the area around the factory, like an unclosed door or an unusual car parked near the entrance. So the security guard is looking for things that are weird. Your next word is abstain. It's a verb. It means to hold oneself back voluntarily, especially from something regarded as improper or unhealthy. It can also mean to refrain from casting a vote, so not voting. Your synonyms are refrain, and your antonym is indulge in. So the picture over here goes along with the first definition. So you hear about abstaining usually in terms of something like drugs or alcohol or sex. So if you are not doing one of those three things, you would say that I abstain from drugs or I abstain from alcohol. The term abstinence, which is the noun form of abstain, is usually used to talk about abstaining from sex. The second definition is what your sample sentence is giving you. So not liking either candidate, Vivek abstained from casting his vote for either one. So you'll hear about in a vote in Congress, perhaps, candidates abstaining from voting if they decide not to vote. Your next root is arch, which means chief or leader. And your first word is archetype. It's a noun, and it is the original pattern or model from which all things of the same kind are copied or on which they are based. Your synonyms are stereotype, embodiment, or representative. So that's a word we've had before. Your helpful hint. With the pronunciation, the beginning of the word is identical to the beginning of architect. In this case, it isn't pronounced like arch, so it is archetype. Your sample sentence is, so many love stories seem to resemble Romeo and Juliet that it's safe to call Shakespeare's play the archetype for all stories about doomed love. So I'm going to talk about archetypes first in terms of literature or storytelling. So Romeo and Juliet is like the original love story where lovers are doomed and they fall deeply in love and then they die, right? And then there's a lot of other stories that are based on that. So we call that the archetype. It's like the original pattern. There are other ways that patterns or archetypes appear in literature. So this is a very kind of basic general archetype over here. That's your plot diagram. So you could call the plot diagram an archetype for most fiction, because most fiction is going to follow this formula where we have an exposition, we have the rising action, right? We get to this climax where the conflict has its highest point, right? And then we have some falling action and some resolution. So on a very basic level, you can call that an archetype. You can also think about the patterns that specific genres of movies follow. So for example, a romantic comedy follows a pretty specific archetype, right? Where two people meet, they usually originally don't like each other, then they fall in love, then there's some conflict where like they almost break up or they do break up, right? And then they like get back together and live happily ever after. So it's the archetype that romantic comedies follow. So you can think about that same kind of idea of there being different archetypes for other types of movies and other types of stories as well. All right, non-literature based, you could talk about like a computer archetype would be a computer that other computers are based off of. So it works in other situations other than literature as well. All right, your second arch word is much simpler. It is an arch rival. This is a main rival or a number one enemy. Much easier than an archetype, right? So these aren't actually arch rivals. That's my fault. Right, but Batman has arch rivals and Superman has arch rivals, right? It's like the antagonist, whoever's against the supervillain. Oh, actually, this might be from like the Batman versus Superman movie. if that was the right title. Anyway, arch rival, number one enemy. Your sample sentence is the last stung even more because they were defeated by their arch rival, whom they hated more than any other team in the league. Your next root is by, which means to, and I think both of these words go really well along with that root. So your first word is bilingual, which is an adjective, which means able to communicate in two languages. Your sample sentence is Robert was incredibly helpful on his trip to South America as he was bilingual and able to help his American friends communicate with the locals. So pretty straightforward. If you are bilingual, you speak two languages. Bipartisan is your next word. Bipartisan means representing two political groups or factions, or unbiased. Your helpful hint is when you hear people talk about bipartisan politics in American government, that implies support from both Republicans and Democrats. So bipartisan, right, two parties both agree on something. Helpful hint keeps going. Furthermore, the issue is not biased by right-wing or left-wing beliefs, right? So it's both parties can agree on something. If it's a bipartisan decision, or if it's a bipartisan committee, it has people from both parties on the committee. Your sample sentence, because of the Republicans' desire to bring jobs to America and the Democrats' efforts to reduce pollution, the senators wrote a bipartisan bill to allow the construction of factories for electrical automobiles, right? So that's an issue that both sides kind of had an interest in, came together on, and they wrote a bipartisan bill. Your next root is an or any, which means year. And your first word is centennial. It's an adjective, and it means pertaining to or marking the completion of 100 years. Your sample sentence is on his centennial birthday, his children purchased a cake and decorated it with 100 candles. So you could have a centennial birthday if you turn 100. You'll more often hear about centennial celebrations, for example, for a town. So 100 years after a town was founded, they might have a centennial celebration to celebrate 100 years. Your next word is perennial. It is an adjective, and it means lasting for an indefinitely long time or enduring. You often hear perennial in terms of like perennial problems or perennial issues would be problems or issues that never go away, or a perennial question would be a question that never gets answered. Your next definition refers specifically to plants, and it means having a life cycle lasting more than 2 years. Your synonyms are perpetual and persisting, and your sample sentence is tulips are perennial plants. You do not have to replant them every year. So there's your difference between if you ever go to a garden shop and you see perennial plants and annual plants. The perennial plants are ones that come back year after year after year, whereas the annuals are ones that only last for 1 year and then they die, and then you have to replant them the next year. So perennial means they keep coming back every year. Your next root is vert or verse, which means turn. Your first word is convergence. It's a noun. It is an act or instance of meeting at a point or line. So if you look at this picture over here, you have a convergence of railroad tracks because they're coming together there. The verb form is converge, if you want that, right? So you could either say there is a convergence of tracks there, or the tracks converge right there. They come together. It could also be a little bit less literal, like you could have a convergence of different ideas that came together to form one plan, for example. Your sample sentence is when the director posted the cast list for the play, it caused a mad convergence of actors clumped around the piece of paper trying to see who had been cast for which roles. So the convergence of actors is the coming together of actors. Your next word is subversive, which is an adjective, and it is tending to undermine the principles of, especially an attempt to overthrow an established government. So subversive is kind of like rebellious. You're trying to undermine someone. So you could be subversive against a government if you're trying to go against the government. You could be subversive against a teacher if you're trying to go against a teacher. And your synonyms are seditious, disruptive, or revolutionary. I think revolutionary or disruptive are probably the more common ones that you might know. Your sample sentence is Jeanette was criticized for being subversive when she kept making negative comments about her boss behind her back, hoping to get people to become more bitter about their work. So this is a really good example of being subversive, would be talking about your boss and kind of spreading rumors about someone in a position of authority, right? So you can't really be subversive against like your friend, but you could be subversive to your boss or to your teacher or to someone else who's in a position of authority if you're going against them and trying to stir up trouble. Your final root is voke, which means call. And your first word is invocation. It's a noun, and it is the act of calling upon a deity, spirit, etc. for aid or protection. It doesn't give you a synonym there, but prayer is a pretty good synonym for invocation. Whoops. You are calling on a higher power for aid or protection. Your sample sentence is, in her later years, she began whispering soft invocations to the gods whenever life threw another obstacle her way. And you see someone praying over here. Your last word is provocative. It is an adjective. It is tending to stir up or arouse, and that's after it. It could arouse feelings or desires or activities. Your synonyms are inflammatory, controversial, or aggravating. I think controversial is a good synonym there. So there's kind of two senses in which we use provocative. One is in terms of something being controversial. So a provocative statement would be a controversial statement that would like get people on both sides like kind of roused up or angry, or shocked, right? And then the other way that we use provocative tends to be in a more sexual manner. So we might say like that someone was dressed provocatively, which means that they're stirring up sexual feelings in the people who are watching them or seeing them. So there's those two senses. The first sense is this guy over here, right? So someone has said something provocative and now he's getting angry about it. You may remember from the last unit, pro meaning forward. So to provoke someone is to call him forward or call him out. A provocative comment calls us out from our routine. Your sample sentence says, some people thought the novel was too provocative because it shook them out of their comfort zone. So they did not like the fact that the novel had been controversial or brought up particular feelings. That is it for Unit 4.